The dark side of Disney Studios was well known to the public long before the acquisition of the Star Wars universe. But if there's one heroine who seems the polar opposite of this, sometimes scandalous reputation, it's the gentle Princess Snow White, whose very name evokes purity and innocence. For a long time, people have tended to mock her extreme naivety, her childlike temperament, her kindness that borders on foolishness, and her constant joy that leads her to sing love songs at every turn, all while interacting with every bird she encounters along her way. But here's the thing. Snow White's personality actually hides a heavy secret. What if behind that angelic appearance lies a completely different truth? What if Snow White wasn't just an innocent victim but also a femme fatale, capable of manipulating and seducing without us even realizing it? Today, I'm going to present to you 7 arguments, one for each dwarf, that might forever change your view of this iconic character. And make sure to stay until the end because the 6th argument is so obvious that you'll wonder how you ever missed it. Let's get started. Argument 1. The symbolism of the brunette. Let's begin with her appearance. In the collective imagination, the sexy pinup is often depicted as a blonde with blue eyes, embodying an ideal of beauty, often seen as superficial and a bit silly in its most stereotypical versions. But Snow White, with her hair as black as ebony, her skin as white as snow, and her lips as red as blood, evokes something much darker and more complex. Her look is, in fact, closer to the Gothic style, known for its dark sensuality and mysterious aura. This style also brings to mind the imagery of vampires, creatures that are both enchanting and dangerous. Snow White then becomes the femme fatale of the film noir side, a much more formidable figure than the archetype of the ideal blonde. It's interesting to note that in the 1930s, in Hollywood, brunettes were often the stars who portrayed this kind of complex and dangerous femme fatale, synonymous with danger, enchantment, and manipulation. This is an archetype we also find in the filmography of British director Hitchcock, for example, where angelic blondes are often contrasted with dark, dangerous brunettes. Another huge reference from the 1930s in the world of animation is, of course, Betty Boop, the famous little pinup who would forever embed herself in popular culture with her short black hair and large dark eyes. In short, all these references necessarily influence the physical appearance chosen for Snow White. But is this a surprising choice? After all, in a fairy tale from the world of the Brothers Grimm, a universe that, as we know, is far less childlike, innocent, and wholesome than it appears, with very dark aspects that we won't detail here if you want this video to stay in the family-friendly category. Argument 2. Snow White's style and youth. Let's now move on to her appearance and what it reflects. Let's get straight to the point. Snow White has a small chest, far from the cliché of the voluptuous body that often represented the femme fatale in the 1930s in the United States. But she isn't slim either. It's a much more recent visual that animated women have been given wasp-waisted figures that defy all the laws of gravity. One of the most striking examples in this category being the cartoon Winx Club. His opening theme has caused almost as many victims as the legendary Let It Go from Frozen. Anyway, all this to say that this small chest mainly highlights Snow White's great youth. Her round face, small stature all indicate a juvenile freshness. In fact, the huntsman calls her my child, which only reinforces the idea that she is still very young. Her style is also revealing. Her modest bob haircut is far from the eroticism of long hair often associated with seduction. Yet, this cut is reminiscent of the flapper style, very popular at the time, which embodied a new form of sensuality, more androgynous and rebellious. Her childlike appearance is accentuated by the red ribbon tied in her hair and a high-pitched voice, often overacted. It adds to this impression of apparent innocence. Her gestures, very theatrical, are reminiscent of a little starlet, always under the spotlight. Snow White is also heavily made up. Her red lips, for example, are a classic symbol of the femme fatale, a ritual look that remains timeless, as evidenced by the famous Taylor Swift, who often adopts this classy and very feminine style. Snow White also has heavily made up eyes, with a smoky eye that enhances her gaze, which wouldn't be out of place on a beauty YouTuber. After all, the eyes are the femme fatale's weapon of choice. As for her brightly colored dresses, they reflect not only her cheerful and lively temperament, but also a free-spirited, almost gypsy-like aspect. This festive and colorful style gravitates around a sensual universe that will later inspire the characterization of Esmeralda in another Disney production. Bringing all these elements together, one might wonder if Snow White might actually be one of the first Lolitas, a concept popularized by Nabokov in the 1950s, describing a very beautiful and sexualized young girl, seemingly innocent but provocative in detail. A true starlet, she too is all about appearance and implicit seduction. Argument 3. Snow White's relationships with men. From her very first scene, Snow White demonstrates her power of seduction over men. She charms the prince even before their first meeting. Like a siren, she sings a love song over a wishing well. This gesture, almost magical, suggests a form of enchantment. Her wishes over the well come true immediately, proving that magic is at work. The prince appears, the most important man in the kingdom in the coming years, as he's destined to succeed his father, the king, and falls in love with her before even seeing her. So it's a very romantic and sensual scene for a Disney movie. Snow White, in seductress mode, flees after attracting the man, reinforcing her power of seduction by her inaccessibility. The following scene is reminiscent of the classic imagery of Romeo and Juliet, where the prince sings a serenade under her balcony. Despite her rags, Snow White embodies beauty itself and kisses a white bird, a symbol of purity. The bird then flies to the prince and kisses him on the lips. A bold move for a first encounter, highlighting Snow White's audacity and the sensual nature of this interaction. Snow White also seduces the huntsman, who is given the direct order to kill her, but in front of her, he falls at her feet, seduced by her beauty, her charm, and her extreme kindness. Her method of seduction could be summed up as kill them with kindness, disarm them with overwhelming kindness. The huntsman knows he risks his life if the queen discovers his betrayal, but he chooses to save Snow White, revealing the queen's plans and urging her to flee. This scene is particularly symbolic. A brutal man, whose role is to slaughter innocent prey, is softened by this embodiment of purity. The warrior's brute force is defeated by the beauty and femininity of his prey. In a way, the hunter becomes the hunted, while Snow White takes on the role of the hunter through her triumph. Finally, the seven dwarfs suffer a similar fate. They are enchanted creatures, but it's Snow White's beauty that seems to cast a spell on them. The first encounter with her is imbued with sensuality, as they discover her sleeping in their beds. Her beauty hypnotizes them and triumphs over everything, including intelligence embodied by Doc. Even Grumpy, the most reluctant, eventually falls under a spell, though he hides it behind his bad temper. These seven dwarfs, with their very different characteristics, symbolize the diversity of men, proving that all of them, without exception, succumb to Snow White's beauty. She kisses them multiple times, and once she acts as a maternal figure to them by cleaning the house, asking them to wash their hands, and cooking for them. The sensuality and dominance remain present in this relationship. Snow White thus reveals herself to be a femme fatale who knows how to manipulate and seduce, even in the most innocent situations. Argument 4. The power of beauty. Snow White's power, far from being limited to a mere innocence, lies in a much more complex and disturbing dimension: her beauty. In the tale, Snow White's beauty is described as an almost supernatural attribute, capable of awakening overwhelming passions and provoking devastating fits of jealousy. This beauty is so feared that it drives a queen, a symbol of vanity and established feminine power, to consider murder to neutralize it. At the heart of the tale, the queen is initially the embodiment of beauty and elegance. She enjoys undeniable power and unquestioned authority as a dominant woman. However, when Snow White's beauty becomes the subject of the mirror's magic, the queen is shaken. Her reaction isn't limited to mere jealousy. It transforms into a destructive obsession. The queen is consumed by a rage and anxiety that reveal just how deeply Snow White's beauty threatens her. This dynamic reveals a reductive but powerful vision of beauty as an instrument of domination. Snow White's beauty is so penetrating and disturbing that it not only influences the men around her, but it also shakes the authority and self-confidence of the queen. Thus, Snow White doesn't just dominate men, but she also imposes her power on the women around her. Even in her passivity, Snow White embodies a latent power that radiates through her mere presence. This portrayal, typical of the time, reflects a view of women as dangerous figures when they possess beauty that defies norms and expectations. Snow White's beauty isn't just a tool of seduction. It becomes a weapon, a force of disruption, shaking both societal and power dynamics. The queen, despite her magic and authority, is unable to compete with the simple natural beauty of a young girl, thus emphasizing the idea that youth and purity, embodied by Snow White, are invincible forces in the face of established power. The power of beauty, as depicted in Snow White, goes beyond superficial attraction. It becomes a metaphor for the disruptive potential of the feminine, capable of overturning hierarchies and destabilizing the most entrenched authorities. Before we go any further, the Magic Mirror has revealed that some of you haven't subscribed to my channel or left a comment on this video yet. If you've enjoyed this analysis so far, now is the time to fix that. Click like, subscribe, and leave a comment to let me know that you appreciate my work. Now, let's move on to argument 5. So argument 5 is the kiss scene, a supernatural and fatal seduction. The final kiss scene in the Snow White story is much more than just a gesture of love. It embodies a passive yet powerful seduction, revealing a darker side of the heroine that aligns her with the femme fatale figure. Snow White, lying in a glass coffin, seems lifeless, a victim of tragic fate. Yet, even in death, she continues to exert an irresistible attraction. This seductive power is so intense that it transcends the boundaries of life and death. The fact that her coffin is made of glass is no coincidence. This choice allows everyone to gaze upon her beauty, even in death. It's both strange and unsettling, emphasizing the idea that even deceased, Snow White must be seen and admired. This exposure perpetuates her power of fascination, a power that doesn't fade with her life. On the contrary, her unaltered beauty in death becomes a symbol of her eternal hold over those who gaze upon her. And this echoes the vampire myth, a figure who triumphs over death and irresistibly attracts the living, blending desire and terror. It's as if even in the afterlife, Snow White commands the prince to bring her back to life with just her force of attraction. The kiss that awakens her is not just an act of true love, it's a response to an unconscious, almost supernatural call emitted by Snow White. The prince, completely entranced, obeys this irresistible call, crossing the boundary between life and death to save her. This scene thus reveals a dark side of Snow White. Despite her apparent innocence, she possesses a seductive power so strong that it manipulates others, even when she is dead. In this precise moment, she becomes the embodiment of the femme fatale, a figure whose beauty and innocence are both formidable weapons and inevitable traps. So, Snow White is not simply awakened by a kiss, she is brought back to life by the irrational desire of the prince, a desire she has sparked without any conscious effort. This resurrection testifies to the power and darkness of her influence. Even seemingly harmless, she exerts a force that defies logic and reason, transforming a fairy tale scene into an ambiguous symbol of fatal seduction and power beyond death. Argument 6. Temptation and the Fall, the parallel with Eve the Temptress. The poisoned apple scene is one of the most iconic moments in the Snow White story, and it is full of symbolism. This moment parallels the story of Eve in the Garden of Eden, enriching the complexity of Snow White's character and revealing a fatal dimension hidden behind her apparent innocence. Snow White, like Eve, is both the tempter and the tempted. When she accepts the apple from the witch's hand, she succumbs to a temptation that leads to her downfall. This scene is not merely an act of naivety. It symbolizes the moment when Snow White approaches the figure of the femme fatale. By biting the apple, she plays an active role in her own fall, an act reminiscent of Eve's original sin. But where Eve plunges humanity into a spiral of sin, Snow White returns stronger, resurrected by the power of true love. This temporary fall and subsequent resurrection show that Snow White, even unconsciously, masters the dynamics of seduction and power. Despite her apparent simplicity, she plays a complex role where she embodies both innocence and temptation, purity and fatality. Like Eve, she is a pivot around which a drama of temptation and redemption unfolds. By rising from her fall, she shows that her seduction goes beyond mere innocence. It is a force that, even after the fall, only grows stronger. The parallel with Eve thus highlights Snow White's duality, a symbol of innocence that carries within it the seeds of a fatal temptation. Argument 7. The role of the idealized woman, a dangerous and reductive perfection. Snow White embodies the archetype of the idealized woman, a figure so perfect that she becomes almost unreal and dangerous. This perfection is manifested in a combination of qualities: extreme beauty, disarming innocence, and unalterable kindness. She is sweet, naive, and her only desire seems to be to marry a prince, remain beautiful, and engage in domestic tasks like cooking and cleaning. In this, she represents an idealized but deeply reductive vision of womanhood, shaped by male desire. This idealization, far from making her powerful and fulfilled, turns her into a figure manipulated by external expectations. Snow White thus becomes the embodiment of male fantasies, a beautiful, passive, and docile woman whose ambitions are limited to satisfying patriarchal norms. This role of the perfect woman actually makes her dangerous because she perpetuates an image of femininity that is disconnected from reality. By striving to be this ideal woman, Snow White becomes an unattainable figure with whom few women can truly identify. Thus, far from representing a model of a fulfilled woman, Snow White is trapped by this imposed perfection. This image of innocence and purity, while seductive, actually becomes a destructive force because it perpetuates a reductive vision of what it means to be a woman. The subtle seduction she exerts is not that of a woman aware of her power, but of a figure shaped by others' expectations, embodying an ideal that, far from liberating, imprisons. So, to conclude, who is Snow White really? The naive princess we've always believed her to be, or a femme fatale hidden beneath a veil of purity? The subtlety of Disney's classic is that Snow White can be seen as either showing the skill in her character's writing. Indeed, behind this apparent simplicity lies a complex and fascinating character capable of manipulating hearts with formidable subtlety. As they say, the devil's greatest trick is convincing the world he does not exist. Perhaps Snow White's true strength lies in this illusion of innocence, making her more formidable than we ever imagined. Thank you for watching this video to the end, and I see you soon for another deep dive into the nightmarish world of fairy tales.